Okay, if you're watching these in sequence, we are up to video number 9 here. And in this talk, we will address writing a grant. Actually finding a grant, writing a grant, what are the good things about a grant, what are the troubles with a grant, and so let us begin down the path of grant writing. First of all, as I talked about in the last one where we mostly focused on needs assessment, why do you want a grant? Well, the biggest reason people want a grant is because it's about as free as money gets. And most social service agencies are not flush with money. As a matter of fact, most of us scrabble to survive and to be able to provide whatever services we really need to. So anytime there's an opportunity to bring in more money so that we can provide more services to more clients, it's a wonderful thing, because certainly, as any of you in the field know, social services, mental health, clinical counseling needs, there are so many more people who could benefit from them, who simply there is not the funding there to meet their needs. So if we can tap into sources of funding that aren't necessarily fee-for-service, and fee-for-service is client comes in and client signs a check. Unfortunately, a lot of the folks who social workers work with do not have anything to back that check up with. We work with some of the people who have the lowest incomes or no incomes in this nation, and so they really can't afford services. So we have to rely on money to come in from elsewhere, and some of that comes from tax dollars. Some of it comes from gifts and donations. Some of it clients will do a sliding fee scale. One of the sources of funding does tend to be grants. So what is a grant? A grant is a gift of money, does not have to be paid back, that comes from a source. Oftentimes the source is a government source, oftentimes the source is a private source. And as I have up here, the government grants get broken into, does it come from the feds, does it come from the state, or is it local? And private grants tend to be broken into foundational grants and corporate grants. And the difference between corporate and foundation, to some extent, is when the company chooses to give money, it's a different tax structure for them. So if a company chooses to donate a lot of money to good causes, they often get a tax break if they split off and have a foundation. So it's just sort of a different way for the IRS to handle it. Generally speaking, larger monies come through foundations. Corporate grants, locally, like Walmart offers grants, Target offers grants, a number of local corporations over in Tri-Cities, the Pacific Northwest Labs offers grants, a number of the folks out at the Hanford site, the companies out there offer grants, but they tend to be in the $500 to $2,000 range, whereas foundation grants tend to be from $50 to $50,000 to $5 million. So foundations often give big monies. Corporate tends to be more in the hundreds to thousands of dollars. Government grants, the feds are the ones who tend to give the big bucks. They have more bucks. We pay more money in federal taxes. State tends to give the in-between, and local tends to give very much smaller. And they also come with sort of different limitations, different sort of strings and so forth attached. But the benefit of grants is it is a source of funding which comes into the agency to cover oftentimes rather specific things. So as I said in the last DVD, grants rarely, if ever, cover sort of general operating expenses of an agency. But they will often cover specific things. So there are capital grants. Those tend to cover things like buildings. So if your agency needs a new building, you would have a capital campaign and people would raise money and they'd build a building. There are grants for sort of specific tangible things. So when I was working at Christian Aid, I think that I looked in the Ronald McDonald Foundation would give us a grant if we needed a van. There's a lot of agencies which could use a van. I was just talking with a graduate of ours, and she was saying she works for a social service agency which does home health care services. And one of the things they like to do is to be able to go into a client's home and take them out for the day. So it's nice to have a van that you can go pick up a number of your people, and you can take them on a field trip, you can take them grocery shopping, you can take them to Walmart to run some errands. So vans can be very helpful. And sometimes she was working with people who had a lot of physical health needs. A van which has a lift in which you can bring a wheelchair is very nice. Well, a wheelchair lift adds a huge sum of money onto a van. So you could write a grant. If you had a van, you could write a grant to put a lift onto it or something. So there are some grants which cover physical, tangible things. Other grants will cover programs, as I talked about, and that's something grants like. And that's where you sometimes can get things like salaries covered in a grant which is paying for a program, because much of a program often is the people who run the program. They will also sometimes pay for a proportion of the lights, because a proportion of the lights are lighting the room in which the program is housed. And then, you know, the pencils that you use and the toner that you use in your printers, and et cetera, and so forth and so on. So there are, and each request for proposal will tell you, you know, this is specifically what we will fund and this is what we won't fund, and you want to pay attention to those things and only apply for the dollars where they actually come from. So let's say that your agency has developed a program, and last week we were discussing this program that would be for a program for kids after school. So one of the decisions you have to make is, where do we want said program to be? So if you think you can get a lot of money, you might be able to build a building for such a program. The other thing is, if you want to build a building, you have to have a place to build it. And sometimes the most optimal place, there isn't a spot for a new building. So if we're here in Walla Walla, if you wanted a place that was convenient to kids leaving the middle schools and high schools, there may not be a piece of land that you could actually put a building on. So you might want to purchase an already existing building or something like that. Well, purchasing a building where a whole bunch of teenage kids can hang out after school is going to cost you a bunch of money. So the kids certainly can't afford it. Teenage kids are not known for being flush with money. Their parents may not be able to afford it. The schools likely can't afford it. So you decide we need to build a building and we need to have a program. Maybe we could get a grant to build us a building, and maybe we could get another grant that would actually sort of run the program that's in this building. So you look through, and as I said, what you want to do is look through these things that get called RFPs, or requests for proposals. And this used to be a very paper-intensive process. The federal government, I believe, used to send out an RFP, and perhaps still does, on a daily basis. And it was about yay thick on a daily basis, in about the thinnest paper that you could imagine. So if you look, many of you probably own a Bible, and Bibles often are published on very, very thin paper. That's sort of like the paper that the federal RFPs would come on, this terribly, terribly, terribly thin paper, so that they could put a lot of information, and it didn't cost too much to ship, and it didn't cost too much to, you know, print out all the time. But you'd look through, you know, there are newsletters that different private foundations have. So, you know, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Annie Casey Foundation, the Ford Foundation. Often they'll publish newsletters that come out monthly or quarterly or annually or whatever. And in their newsletter, they may have requests for proposals. Many foundations have websites these days. And so if you get on the website, you can look what are the things which they are currently asking for proposals for. And these will be, you know, looking for a proposal for people who want to help, you know, programs to address needs of alcoholic teenagers. Looking for money for people interested in new technologies to reduce the impact of global warming. People interested in how to grow longer cucumbers. So there are grants out there for everything under the sun, for the arts, for, you know, music, for technology, for agriculture, you name it, there are grants out there. You want to kind of get into that social service niche. And once you get into the social service niche, you then want to sort of limit your grants or your grant searching. First of all, who funds social services? Within social services, who funds your particular area of interest? Some people who fund social services are very interested in kids, could give a hoot about adults. Some are very interested in addictions, really don't care very much about mental health or homelessness. Some are very interested in funding, for minority populations, aren't so interested in funding for sort of, mainstream Caucasian Americans. So who's interested in kids, sort of teenage kids? So that's your sort of topic of interest. Another thing which is huge is the geographic region. And what I certainly found when I was working at Christian Aid, trying to find grants that they could apply for, was that people like to give money to a specific region of the world, and more often than not, people like to give money in their own community. The problem that I found living in Washington, in eastern Washington, was, first of all, you could find, foundations or government who wanted to fund social services. Then I had to look for people who are interested in funding sort of homelessness, was what Christian Aid's goal is. Then we had to rule out a lot of government grants for the Christian Aid Society because, well, what is the first name of the Christian Aid Center? Christian. And in our country we have this little thing called separation of church and state. So government grants would cover some things that Christian Aid does, but maybe not everything that Christian Aid does because of this separation of church and state. So if you work for a church-based agency, you kind of have to be cautious with your government grants simply because of that. So if we wanted to, pay for a pastor to come minister to people and have chapel services at Christian Aid, it's likely you're not going to get a government grant for that. But if you want to build a new building that people could sleep in, that might be something that you might be able to get a government grant for. So you kind of have to look at all the little fine print and so forth. But so you go for area of interest, homelessness, and then you say, and who wants to fund people who live in Walla Walla, Washington, or Lewiston, Idaho, or Hermiston, Oregon, or wherever it is that your agency is. And this can be a real challenge. Now, of course, if you live in Walla Walla, you're not going to apply for an Oregon State grant. That's kind of a no-brainer. You're going to apply for a Washington State grant. But let's say that you decide that you want to go for an Annie Casey grant. And the Annie Casey Foundation funds a lot of work with kids and families. That is sort of where their heart is, and that's where they put their money. Let's say you want to go for a Bill and Melinda Gates grant. They fund healthcare, they fund education, and it may be that some of the work that you as a social worker do fits in with sort of the Bill and Melinda's interests. Do they give money to people in Walla Walla, in Hermiston, in Lewiston? Well, some foundations do, and some foundations don't. And I found that a lot of foundations in Washington tends to be goodness where everybody in Washington lives, which is on the west side, and they really kind of like to keep their money on the west side. The next big place where people in Washington have money is called the Inland Empire, which is the Spokane region. Well, does the Spokane Inland Empire stretch its fingers down to Walla Walla? Well, not really according to most of them. You don't want to spend hours and hours or weeks of your time writing a sophisticated grant proposal for somebody who is not going to give money outside of the Puget Sound area. So if you see the greatest grant in the world that's so applicable to your, after-school youth program, and it says we fund people who live in the Puget Sound region, before you write this wonderful proposal, pick up the telephone, get on your email, get in contact with somebody who is funding that and say, we really have a lovely program. However, we live in Walla Walla, and it's really not quite on the Puget Sound. Would you consider a program on the other side of the Cascades? And if they say, there's so much need over here on this side of the Puget Sound, I am really sorry, but if we spread ourselves too thin, we can't do anybody any good, so we're going to keep our money concentrated here. You say, thank you very much, I wish you'd change your mind. If you do, please get back in touch with me. If they say, we'll think about it. Or if they say, tell me a little bit about your program. Or if they say, why don't you send a proposal and see what we think? Then that's at least, they're tossing you little tidbits. Maybe it's worthy of pursuing it a little bit further. But if they say, forget it, then don't spend a ton of energy. If they say, send us a proposal and see how the chips fall. Well, if the proposal takes you 2 hours to write, you might want to do it. If the proposal takes you 2 weeks to write, it might not be worth doing it if they really think your chances are quite low. So you kind of have to say how likely it is that I'll get this money and how much time do I have to invest. I have a friend who worked for a food bank, and she would write grants literally in pencil. Or actually, she would get grants literally in pencil. They were one sheet of paper that people had just sort of answered a bunch of questions, and Karen would get these grant proposals, and she would send food or send money for food off to people, because she worked in sort of this major clearinghouse where all the food came into, and her job was to distribute it to all the soup kitchens in her region of upstate New York. So those were very simple proposals that you could handwrite with a pen or a pencil. She said a lot of times the spelling wasn't even very good. It took people 5 to 10 minutes to do. Takes you 5 to 10 minutes, goodness, you might as well apply. I have worked in agencies, and some of you probably work in agencies, where the whole place shuts down, comes to a grinding halt, and all clients are canceled, all doors are shut, and everybody works on this proposal for 2 solid weeks to the exclusion of all else. You only want to do that when you are equally as likely to get that money as is anybody else. And some grants really do merit that. You're writing a $2 million grant. Okay, if you are as equal as anybody else in the playing field, it's worth going for $2 million, maybe 2 weeks' time. But if they say, well, we really need to look at everybody in the Puget Sound, and if nobody in the Puget Sound looks any good, maybe we'll think about yours. Is that worth 2 weeks of your time for everybody in your agency? You have to make that decision. But so this is, find based on area, find based on, social service, area of interest, and then geographic region. And those are some of the rule-outs. And that information should generally be fairly findable on the internet or in agency or foundations published literature. And then, pick up the telephone, send them an email or something and find that out. And if your agency already gets money from people, they will know, these are the foundations, these are the places where these folks tend to have an interest in what it is that we do. Then there's just how do you write this thing. Part of the skill that you develop or that you need for writing a grant are the skills that you will develop in writing the paper for this class. The more sophisticated the grant proposal, the more you will use the research skills, the integrated literature review skills, the proposal writing skills that you're using for the project that you're doing for this class. So those skills for that project, you don't just sort of drop at the end of graduate school. Those are tools which will help you very much to write a sophisticated grant proposal that you would need for the feds. You will likely benefit from having for large state grants. And if it's a big corporation grant, they'll often ask you to do a literature review too, because what that is it's substantiating that your program actually is grounded in some sort of science, that there is a need. Here's what the need is. We understand the issue. It shows that you understand the issue and the need, and it shows that you understand, and there's some theoretical rationale for why you're developing the program that you're developing. So those are all tools that you're getting writing the paper for this class, just in case you were wondering why you were writing such a paper for this class. So that's sort of how to find grants. Just a couple little tips on how to write grants. Grant reviewers tend to, especially if they get a lot of proposals, tend to be very picky. Now, not everybody gets a lot of proposals. I have heard people talk. I've been on airplanes with people from NIH, NIMH, and some of the big federal agencies, and I've overheard them saying that they had grants in the $1 million ranges, and they had almost no proposals on their table. Which means that if you think, oh, is it really worth my time? Well, I bet 2,000 people are going to apply for 5 grants. Well, sometimes 2,000 people will, and sometimes 2 people will apply for 5 grants. And the fact that you simply got one in means that if it's at all intelligent, you're likely to get it because there's no competition there. But if there is competition, and a lot of times there is, one of the quick ways that people can just throw your grant in the don't even bother look at it heap is they tell you it has to be APA format, and you don't know APA format, and it's such an anal little thing to learn. Why bother? I'm just going to write it in the format that I know. Yours goes in the trash. They tell you to put it in 12-point font. Doesn't quite fit in the 30 pages in 12-point font. They'll never notice that I put it in 11-point font. Yours goes in the trash. You put it in 12-point font, but they said it had to be no more than 30 pages. Oh, I'm sure they won't care that it's 33 pages. Yours goes in the trash. So it needs to look good. You need to dot your I's, cross your T's, do every little anal thing that they tell you on the proposal. These are the rules. Play by the rules. This is not a time for your lovely, charming, mischievous, rebellious nature to come out. This is a time to play by the rules. If you know that you are not good at details, you are the big, broad, visionary thinker, cool. You do the big, broad, visionary ideas, and you bring in the person in your agency who is the detail-oriented person and have him or her read it over, tidy it up before it hits the mail. It needs to be in by the deadline. I have worked in agencies where people have written a lovely proposal and they've missed the last FedEx out. You missed the last FedEx out. Doesn't matter if the whole agency came to a grinding halt for the last 2 weeks. They don't care. It shows up on Saturday morning and the last proposal was due, postmarked Friday night. You're out of luck. You don't get looked at. So follow all of those rules very, very carefully. Write it well. Be attentive to detail. And have someone who can write. If you don't know how to evaluate a program and you need to know how to evaluate a program, call in a consultant. It can be well worth the money. There are people who make their living writing grants for other people. They skim a proportion off the top if you get the grant. Sometimes it's worth it because if you get $5 million, you give them 10%, they get $500,000. That's really nice money for them. But you get the other $4.5 million. That's really nice money for you, which you wouldn't have got if you hadn't have called in the big shot who got a lot of money off the top. But you wrote it into the grant, so it's money that comes out of the free money already. So those are just a couple rule or suggestions on how to actually do the writing. Let's say you've done a great needs assessment. You've identified a very cool, innovative program. You have substantiated this program in the research. You have done a really nice literature review. You have sent off a lovely grant proposal. You have a nice budget in it. Bring in someone who knows how to write a budget. The budget matters, and it is very foolhardy to do a poor budget because you will be bound to that budget. We'll talk about that in a minute. So you bring in someone who does a good budget for you, and you have a nice proposal of how you're going to evaluate the program. The people in Bethesda, Maryland, who do the Fed stuff, people in the Bill and Melinda Foundation sitting over in Redmond, they look at it and they say, wow, these people know what they're doing. Cool program, needs assessment, done well, really shows that there's a need and a desire in the community. Great way to evaluate it. You got our $1 million. Okay, you got the grant. What are the good things about that? What are the problems with it? Good things about the grant, you got the $1 million, you got the $5 million, you got the $50,000. However much money it is, you got your free money. You can do your program. You can offer services you might never have been able to offer before. The drawbacks. Some of the drawbacks sort of come before you actually get the money. The last one I have written here is one of them that sort of presents itself before you get the money. The grants generally don't last and often don't pay for everything. So that if you get this $1 million, let's say you're going to get $1 million a year for 5 years. Way cool. That's a lot of money. However, let's say that with this $5 million, you are building your building, and a lot of it is for capital, and so that goes there. And then let's say the operating expenses of your youth after school program, let's say are $500,000 a year. It's a very nice program. What are you going to do when the money dries up? You've got this grant for 5 years. At the end of 5 years, you say, bye, kids. Go off, do well. And, you know, kids going through grade school now, there used to be this really cool after-school program, but money's gone. Ta-ta, put a big for sale sign on the building. That's really not very good social services. And I have seen this happen. I've seen like women's shelters go up in communities. Wonderful domestic violence services, offered safe place for, you know, families to stay. Get the building, bring in a bunch of social service providers, have a nice, good place for people leaving domestic violence situations to live. The grant dries up, the building shuts down, no services in the entire area because nobody else was duplicating services, because why duplicate services? So they generally don't last. And grants have gotten wiser to the fact that if I offer you $1 million a year for 5 years and then I pull $1 million, geez, you're kind of out in the cold. And what about all of these clients who've kind of gotten accustomed to having this service? Is that really good continuity of services? Duh, no, it's really bad continuity of services. So many times what grants will do now is they'll say, when you write the proposal, you have to tell us how you're going to sort of compensate for or create this money once we go away. So we're giving you $1 million a year for up to 5 years, but then we're only going to give it to you if you can show us that at the end of that 5 years you're solvent on your own and you don't need us pouring $1 million in. That can be a challenge. The other is that they often don't pay all of it. So they'll give you $1 million a year, but your operating expenses are $2 million a year. So you have to say, well, to get your $1 million, or they'll say, we'll give you our $1 million if you can get the other $1 million somehow else. And so you have to cobble together a bunch of other sources of money to make up that other $1 million of operating expenses. And what will that be? And sometimes part of that's fee for service, and part of that's donations, and part of that's other grants, and part of it's an endowment fund, wherever. But you got to come up with another $1 million to leverage the $1 million from this grant foundation. And sometimes people don't get grants because they don't know how in the world they're going to survive after the grant goes away, but they figure that's a problem that's 5 years down the road. We got 5 years to figure that out. We want to open the agency today. Grants used to say, fine. Enough agencies closed down. Granting agencies now say, tell us how you're going to do it. Think about it now before we get money, because loss of continuity of services can be really quite troubling. And oftentimes people will not fund all of your fiscal needs. They will fund part of it, and you have to bring in other sources of money from somewhere else, and you have to show them that before they'll give you the money. So those are two challenges at the outset. If you can handle those two challenges, then by definition, once you get your grant, there are reports that you must write. Most funding sources have quarterly reports. That means 4 times every year. You have to tell them this is how things are going. Usually the quarterly reports aren't too onerous. The annual report at the end of a year may be rather onerous. It may have some program evaluation you have to do. They usually have a protocol, and they tell you this is exactly what you need to do. And you might want to look at that before you apply for the grant rather than after you get the money, just to make sure it's something that is worth it to you. Accounting can be tricky. The way that you budget, or the way that you write your budget in your grant, is before you get the money, you have to figure out how it is you're going to spend it. And depending on what the grant is, they tell you they will fund different things. So let's say some of it is salaries. Some of it is, sort of the building or something like that. So they'll pay for, lights and heats and so forth for a certain portion of your building where the program is going to be housed. They will fund supplies such as, ink or toner for your printers, and paper, and staples, and pencils, and so forth and so on. But there's all of these, what people call pots of money. And let us say that you have decided that you will need to have $500 in supplies like pencils and so forth, and you need to have $1,000 for things like lights and electricity. Well, let's say that power has gone way up this year. And so you now have $0 left in this account, and it's November, and it's really quite cold. But you really haven't done very much with the supplies account, and you still have $280 left here. So you say, well, $280 should cover our heating bill for the month of December. Why don't we just go over to this pot, and we won't buy so many pencils, and we'll use this extra money to pay for our lights or our heat? Well, no, you won't. Because this money is in the pencil pot, and you are welcome to go to Walmart and buy $280 worth of pencils and toner. But don't you dare spend a penny worth of that on heat, because this pot is empty. You budgeted badly. Tough cookies. It can be a real problem, and I know the agencies which run on a lot of grant money hire special people to kind of balance the pots and to do budgeting at the outset, people who really have a sense of how much money will we need for supplies, how much money will we need for, keeping the building running and so forth. And you want to think about that wisely at the outset. Some grants are far more flexible. Some grants are terribly inflexible. Some agencies, I'm sure, do what gets called creative accounting, which is cheating. If you cheat, if you use this money for heat, and you lie, and you say that you used it for pencils, and they require receipts for the pencils, and it turns out you don't have any receipts, oops, I accidentally lost them, as many people in our federal government seem to be losing all sorts of important things. But if you, lost the receipts for $280 worth of pencils, the grant could say, well, oops, we lost the next $3 million for the next 3 years of funding. So you really, or you could get hit up on a fraud charge. So you really don't want to do creative accounting, meaning cheating with the pots of money and cheating with your grants. But you do want to have wise, intelligent people do your budget and do your accounting, because if you have an agency that's running on, let's say, half of its operating expenses or 3/4 of its operating expenses are this grant which pays for this, and this grant which pays for that, and this grant which pays for this, and all of these budgets and all of these pots, social workers usually look at numbers and go, blah, 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 blah. You got all this money. It can be terribly confusing. Call in someone with a good bookkeeping, accounting, billing kind of background to do this. So accounting and grants can be fuzzy. Accounting in general can be. Grants come with strings. Strings are, if I give you this money, then I want to feel good about how you're spending it. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of the person who's giving you the money, and one of the trainings I was at, the woman who was leading it said, think about grants from this perspective. Instead of that, we, the hungry children of the world, and you have food, please give us the food. And we think of ourselves as so needy and them as so flush with resources. Think about the people who are flush with money as people who have a problem. They have all this money, and they look out at the world and they see all this need, but they don't have expertise in how to meet those needs. So you are helping them with their problem. They're terribly wealthy and they see all this need, but they don't quite know how to mix or how to match the wealth with the need. So you come in and you say, this is how your money can be well spent to make the world a better place. And people say, I think you're right, and that's how come I'm going to give you $500,000, $1 million, $5 million, whatever, because I think that you can take care of this need that breaks my heart, but I don't have expertise in how to fix it, so I'm going to trust that you'll do it well. That's what a grant is. It says, I trust you will take care of this medical problem, this environmental problem, this lack of, arts and interest in the community, this social service problem. So they give you money because you supposedly know what you're doing. But just think, if you're going to give somebody, a gift of $100,000, if you're going to give your kid $100,000, you'd probably prefer that your kids spend it on like a house and a car than that your kids spend it on drugs and tattooing from head to toe. So you give your kid $100,000 and she comes home and she says, hey, like, wow, cool, look, I got tattoos over my whole body and I got enough heroin to last me the rest of my life. And you say, oh, I wish I hadn't given her all that money. She was better off before it. So when we give gifts of money, we sometimes have expectations. That's what strings are. Strings are expectations. Fortunately, the funder often tells us, these are what my expectations are before they give us the money. So we can say, these are the rules of how to spend the money, or these are the rules of how I have to conduct myself. If I want to get this money, is it worth it to me? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. When I was working at the Christian Aid Center, they were getting some small amount of federal money. They mostly run on private donations, or at least did when I worked there in the 90s. They didn't get money from United Way because United Way put certain strings on, and they didn't want to have those strings constraining what they did. They didn't get a lot of federal or government money, in part because it is the Christian Aid Center, but some of their services were able to be funded by government grants. While I was working there, I wrote a grant for, what did they call it, displaced homemakers. And that was a state grant, and it would have given us about $4,000 to $5,000 a month, which is not a bad amount of money, $60,000 a year, and we could have done a lot with that money for the women. And it was specifically for women who had stayed at home sort of raising kids and then were divorced and really didn't know how to reintegrate into the workforce. And I wrote a grant proposal and sent it off, and people liked it, and so we made it from, and it was a two-tiered grant. You have to make it into the running, and then, so let's say they get 1,000, and you're down to 50, and now the 50 that they're going to choose 20, we made it into that tier of 50. Well, between when we got to the 50 and when I tightened up the proposal, sent them off more refined things to go into the, do we actually get this money, the government came up with a new set of strings attached to government money for people who provide housing. And the strings that they provided, if I remember it correctly, it had something to do with the Fairness in Housing Act or something like that. It said that in order to, if you provide housing for people, you need to give people at least 30 days notice before you evict them. And in a place like Christian Aid, where you have a men's shelter on one side of the street and a women and family shelter on the other side of the street, and then you have some other places spread throughout the community, and then you have a communal dining room, the concern was that if you have somebody, and let's say you have someone on the men's side, who turns out to be the scary, potentially violent boyfriend of someone on the women's side, who starts harassing her, or who comes to dinner. Let's say you just have someone who comes to dinner and is belligerent and pulls out a firearm and is very threatening and scary. We didn't think that it was good for anybody to say, you have only 29 days left that you can stay here, and then you need a new place to live. We wanted to be able to say, if somebody was frightening, belligerent, scary, I'm sorry, but we can't provide you a place to stay if you're going to behave like this, so you need to find yourself somewhere else. And we wanted to be able to say that now instead of later. And I'm not sure that's exactly and precisely how it was, but that was my sort of understanding of this legislation that came down. And the executive director of Christian Aid at the time was just worried that we couldn't continue to accept government monies if we had to abide by these rules, because we needed to be able to, you're very troublesome and you're scary, and we got to be able to get you out so we can maintain a safe environment for everybody else who's at the shelter. So this grant proposal that I was in the midst of applying for got chopped because we couldn't accept any more government dollars. And as a matter of fact, we were getting some government dollars that also got cut off because we just couldn't enact that new policy in our agency. So that's an example of this idea of strings, that with our money, we expect you to abide by certain ways that we would like you to run your agency. And sometimes that absolutely fits in with your agency mission statement, with your vision, with your goals, with everybody who works there. And other times it just doesn't work for you. And you say, wow, it would be great to get this, $5,000 or $5 million, but I'm sorry we have to turn it down. And that's just a decision that you need to make sort of on a grant-by-grant basis. But you do want to pay attention to that, because you don't want the money you get to interfere with what your mission is. And it's kind of like the selling your soul to the devil. You know, is it really worth giving up your mission just so you can have some dollars? Now, if you have no mission, if you don't have dollars, you might think about compromise. But if there's other dollars out there that would help you, you know, be consistent with your mission, then you might want to go find them and not have something that comes with strings that really interferes with what it is that you're doing. So again, like to use Christian Aid as an example, if someone said, well, I'm sorry, but there's a separation of church and state, we can give you money if you stop bringing people any sort of religious message. You know, you have a chapel requirement, you have to cut the chapel requirement, and you can't, you know, you can't do any preaching, you can't do any proselytizing, you can't do any encouraging of people to become Christian or religious or anything. I think Christian Aid would have said this is a mission. This is a Christian mission, and our belief is that we help people through helping people to find Christ. And so that would have been so antithetical to their whole purpose and mission statement that those dollars would just be, you know, it's not worth it because this is our reason to be. Now, if you were running a shelter that was a secular shelter, that had a broad array of religions, but religion wasn't fundamental to who the shelter was, that might not be a hard guideline to live by at all. But if it's a Christian mission, then to say you must suck the Christianity out is often not worth it. And so people won't take dollars which put that stipulation on. So anyway, that's a little bit about grants. There are wonderful things about them. There are some problems with them, and what you need to do as you look at your agency and what the grants are available is to just decide on a sort of grant by grant basis, is this something which is worth the energy invested and the sort of stipulations and the sort of nuisance factors that we will get with it in order to get this and be able to provide the services that this money will enable us to. And that is all I have to say about grants, and this is tape number 9 in the series. Over.